Hello, my sewing friends. Here is my review of McCall's 6069 Vintage 1978. I'm Jen, and this is my sewing room where I made this. This is McCall's 6069. It is vintage 1978. I actually made this back in 1978. I made View B with the drawstring waist, and if I remember correctly, it was out of like a turquoisey blue knit, like what we had back then, which was pretty much of a cotton poly or 100% cotton, like an interlock, a little bit of a heavier knit. And I do remember that it had a piece of eyelet that went across the top. And ever since I've had this pattern, starting back then, I always wanted to make the version which was View C. But I love the yoke and the way that the yoke comes up and then goes down again. And it's architecture. I am a sucker for architecture in any piece of clothing. So I found this pattern when I was putting things away or reorganizing. It's been a while ago. I don't even remember how I ran across it again. But I thought I would love to make that again, and I would love to make that version, View C, that I've never made but always wanted to make. Well, the pattern I had was a size small because it was from 1978 when I was this big. I always thought I was fat. Isn't that hilarious? You know, as you get older and you think, I thought I was fat? Look how skinny I was. Well, anyway, I knew that wasn't going to work, and I knew I needed a much bigger size. So I went on Etsy and I found a size medium, and the sizing was spot on. Cut a straight medium, which is a 14-16, which is in the big four patterns about the size I wear pretty consistently. So I did that. I used some navy, this is just a cotton poly with a little bit of spandex in it, like t-shirt knit. And I got some from Joann's, and then I also got some from Walmart in one of those bundles, the off-cut bundles. And so I'm not sure which one it was that it came from, but I used that. And then I also used this stripe, which did come from a Walmart off-cut. Worked out great. You know, the only thing with the fabric that I wish is that I paid a little better attention to these points in the placement of the stripe, because it looks like they're squared off, but actually they're sewn in a point, but you can't tell that because the blue of the stripe kind of comes down a little bit, so no big deal. There were a couple of changes that I made to this pattern. I had no trouble with instructions. You know, I'd been through it before, true, but I just, you know, since then, technology has come a little ways, you think? And sewing techniques have kind of advanced as well. Sewing is a lot easier than it used to be. Well, one of the things I did was use the burrito method to finish the armholes. This has the yoke and then it has a yoke facing. So I sewed the neckline first, and then I sewed the armholes using the burrito method. Worked like a charm. I left the bottom open, and then on the inside I just left the raw edge and then lined it up with the outside and then just stitched it down. I did a top stitch rather than a stitch in the ditch, but either one would have worked. So I also top stitched the neckline and the armhole edges, but I used a very narrow zigzag along, you know, across here and on the side seams, I didn't use that for the top stitching because honestly, this is wide enough and big enough and stretchy enough in the right places that I didn't worry about the stitches pulling and popping. I may be sorry about that later, but I don't think so. Another thing I did was to use some knit interfacing along the places where I needed to stabilize. It's normally where you would do stay stitching, and I think it may have even called for stay stitching, but around the armholes, especially across here where you had some tricky, you know, pivot points that were going to maybe stretch out of shape, and I didn't want that. Especially too, I think what it called for was not stay stitching as much as reinforcement stitching. You know, like you stitch about an inch away from the point, and then you stitch up and then down again, and then you clip that point, that pivot point corner. So I decided that I would use this knit interfacing that I have from Waywack. I got a roll of it, and it's 1 inch wide, and then I usually cut it to where it's 1/2 inch wide. But I got a big roll of it, and it's so helpful because it's knit interfacing, and it's just enough to run along the edge of the fabric to stabilize that edge so that it doesn't stretch out of shape when you go to sew it. So I did that all along the bottom of the yoke, in the front and in the back. I didn't do it around the neckline or facing edges, but that's because I wanted those to stretch. I mean, you just iron it on. It's just iron-on interfacing, but it's cut in that strips, which makes it so much easier. So the only other thing that I did that's kind of an updated technique for me is that whenever I had to trim a seam, like around the neck and around the armholes, I would pink that edge with my pinking shears. And the beauty of that is that you get a much, you remove a lot of the bulk from the seam, but it's almost like you're clipping the curves too, because it's a pinked edge. And so I can feel right now where I did clip, but then I also trimmed it with my pinking shears. So I just think that's a great method. Anytime you're trimming close to the seam, and you want to make sure that it's going to be flexible so that it's going to curve the way that it should, then I think it's a great method. I learned that from Sew Custom, watching Suzanne and her amazing ability to draft her own patterns and do that. So the only other change I made was kind of a big one. And I had cut this a little bit longer because, in 1978, tops were, a little bit below your waistline, and that's about it. And I thought, well, I can take fabric off, but I can't put it back on. So I'll do that. I'll cut it a little bit longer. I think I cut it, 3 or 4 inches longer. And so then when I tried it on, it was really long because apparently this is cut fairly long. And so it was almost a mini dress. I mean, like a tunic, definitely a tunic length, even a long tunic. So I grabbed some more of this, and I thought, what would happen if I put a band around the bottom of this and made it into a little sundress? Yeah, let's try it. So I cut a pretty wide band. It was probably a 6-inch band, and just basted it onto the hem, and I loved it. So I went back in and I thought, now that band needs to be a little, not quite as wide, because I didn't want to take away from this, and it just didn't balance out quite right. So I made it about a 4-inch band. I am so pleased because now I don't have just a top, I have a dress with this little band on the bottom. I just think that's so cool. What a surprise. I never would have imagined that this was going to be long enough to make into a dress. And I had no plans to do that, but it just worked out so serendipitously. Is that the word I want? I think it is. Well, anyway, I am just thrilled. I never want to take this thing off. It's the only thing it's missing is pockets. And if I were really that adamant about pockets, I would just go ahead and put some little patch pockets on, because if I put inseam pockets on the side seams, then they would just pull out of shape, and I wouldn't want that. But I am so pleased. I'm just, it's just so comfy. I want like 6 more of these. I don't know, maybe I'll go back in and make that same one that I made the first time that I made this pattern, because it's not difficult to do, and it's so interesting, the way you've got this yoke, and then the version with the straight across yoke. I know it's easy because I've made it before. So anyway, that is McCall's 6069. I am just so pleased. I'm just so pleased. Soft, comfortable. What more could you ask for in a little dress? So that's it for now for me. And if you'd like to know what I thought about some other little t-shirt tops, which are independent patterns, just check right here. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.